All right, so today we're going to take a look at a case out of Indonesia from their tax court, and it's a situation you sent to us.
Yeah.
And it's PT Mulyabhakti Kahuripan versus the tax authorities.
Yeah.
Basically, right? And the crux of the matter is, like, was the tax office justified in rejecting their appeal because they said it was late?
Right.
So that's what we're going to kind of unpack. What were the arguments, what evidence was used, and then like what the court decided. And this might give us some insight into the process of appeals for taxes and like what is a valid reason for missing a deadline, you know?
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating about this case is that it really gets into like the nuts and bolts of bureaucracy and timelines and like what happens when things don't go according to plan in the real world.
Exactly.
So we have this tax bill, we have an attempt to appeal, and then it gets rejected based on the timing, and then the court has to step in and say, okay, well, wait a minute, what actually happened here?
Right. So let's start at the very beginning. The timeline starts off with this tax assessment. It's got a number 000023 for April 2018, but it was issued on March 31st, 2023, so a few years later.
Okay.
And PT Mulyabhakti Kahuripan, they did try to fight back, right? They sent their first appeal, letter number 013 by snail mail, like the old-fashioned way.
Yep.
On June 27th, 2023. And it had a postmark from the 28th. And then if you look at the tracking, it shows up on July 2nd. But here's where it gets interesting. It was signed for by someone called Pak In, who we later find out is their driver in Ketapang.
Oh, wow. So that's going to be important later.
It is a very important detail because the tax authorities then turn around and say, well, we never got this appeal at all.
Right.
And they even put it in writing in a letter from April 2024 that neither they nor the local tax office in Ketapang had any record of this appeal.
Huh. So you've got this real head scratcher, right? The Postal Service says it was delivered. The tax office says they never saw it.
It's a mystery.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
Well,
So PT Mulyabhakti Kahuripan, they're faced with this denial. They say, well, we sent it. So they submit a second appeal on July 5th, 2024.
wow.
But guess what?
They probably rejected it.
Rejected again. They said, you are outside the 3-month window from that original assessment back in March 2023.
Yeah, which is totally understandable that they have these deadlines in place.
Yeah.
But it does seem a little unfair, right? If the taxpayer makes a genuine effort to file on time, but something goes wrong, that's not really their fault.
Right.
Like in this case.
Exactly. And that's the argument that the company made. They said, look, this is a situation di luar kuasa, which basically means beyond our control.
Right.
And they point to that first attempt. They mailed it. They have the tracking information, even if it did end up in their driver's hands.
Right. But the tax authorities, they weren't buying it.
No, they weren't. They're like, you got the appeal back on July 2nd, 2023.
Right.
We have emails with the Postal Service to prove it.
Yeah.
And you waited over a year to resubmit.
Right.
So not beyond your control.
So are you saying that the company got the appeal back from Pak In, the driver, on July 2nd?
That's what the tax authorities are claiming.
Got it.
So it seems like a pretty open and shut case for the tax office, right?
It would seem so, yeah.
But here's where it gets interesting. The tax court actually sides with PT Mulyabhakti Kahuripan.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They basically say, yeah, the appeal was misdirected, but the company tried to file on time.
Right.
That initial effort counts for something.
I see.
And they annul the rejection from the tax office.
That's really interesting. So they're basically saying that it's not just about ticking boxes and following procedures to the letter, but they're taking into account the intent of the taxpayer and whether they made a reasonable effort to meet the deadline.
Yeah, I think that's a key takeaway here for anyone listening. Yeah. You absolutely need to follow the correct procedures for tax appeals. But if you can prove that you tried to file on time and something weird happened, like this situation with the driver,
right,
the courts might be a little bit more understanding.
Yeah, and what's especially interesting is that the fact that the initial appeal was sent within that 3-month deadline seems like that was really important for the court's decision.
It seems to have been. Yeah, so it wasn't like they just completely ignored the deadline. They did try.
Right. It just went a bit sideways.
Exactly. So it makes you think, in today's world, everything's digital. Everything's complicated. What does beyond your control actually mean anymore?
Right. Where do you draw that line?
It's not always so clear-cut.
Right. And this Indonesian case is just one example of how that line can be a little bit blurry.
Yeah. And different countries, different courts, they might see things totally differently.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue. And it makes you think about the responsibility of both sides, you know, the taxpayers and the tax authorities, to make sure that the system is clear and reliable and fair.
Yeah. It's definitely something to consider as we navigate this increasingly complex world.
A lot to think about, for sure. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Indonesian tax court.
You're welcome. It was fascinating.
We'll be back with more soon.